Our gospel lesson for today, Luke chapter 20, verses 27 through 38. Some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her. And so in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For all 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, when he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living. For to him, all of them are alive. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You know, our lives are filled with questions. We ask a lot of questions. Questions are important. We ask questions for a lot of different reasons. When I was in radio, I had a morning show from 5 till 10, and I started back during those days a little half-hour program. I called it the Mid-Morning Coffee Break. They actually still have that 20-some years after I left the radio station. They call it the coffee break now. I wish they still had mid-morning because I just think that's a neat title, but after you leave, you have no control over anything. But it was a half-hour interview show, and sometimes I would interview people on the telephone. Sometimes I would get local folks in, and we would talk about things going on in town. But the idea was we were just 2 friends sitting around with a cup of coffee having a conversation. And so I would ask lots of questions. That's what I did. I interviewed people pretty much daily on my show. When I attended Leadership Randolph, which was work of the Asheboro-Randolph Chamber of Commerce for young leaders in the Randolph County, Asheboro area. At the end of our time together, they've done it for several years. I was in the second class of Leadership Randolph, and at the end of our several months' time together, we did a variety of things in the community. Some of the folks in our group thought it would be really funny if we came up with superlatives for everybody in our group, in our class, and so I won the award. The superlative I received was the one most likely to ask a stupid question. We can use questions for a lot of ways. Some are good and some are not so good. We can ask questions because we really want to find an answer to something. That's a good, honest way of doing it. But questions also can be a bit manipulative. Questions can be used as a weapon. One person knows the answer, but he wants to see if the other person knows the answer, and so they ask the question, not seeking knowledge, but to try to trip and to trap. Jesus got a lot of those kinds of questions. If we would have backed up just a little bit in the 20th chapter, there are some questions in Luke's gospel. Jesus had come into town riding the donkey. You know the story. He had had the triumphal entry. He's working into Holy Week, and he goes into the temple, and he tears everything up. He runs out the money changers, and the next day somebody comes to him, the chief priest and the scribes and the elders, and they ask him a question. Who gave you authority to do these kinds of things? Later they sent spies to trip him up and to trap him, and they asked questions. They came up to Jesus and they said, Teacher, we know you're smart and we know that you are doing what's right, but tell us, Teacher, is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Questions. Seeking to trip him up and to trap him. Questions. Weapons. Questions. The Sadducees had questions too. These were, I guess you could say, weapons questions as well. The Sadducees were the intellectuals, the elite. They didn't believe in silly stuff like the resurrection of the dead. They had no interest in finding out anything new about that. They had all the answers. They were smart enough. And so they asked the question just to trip up Jesus, to humiliate Jesus, to discredit this silly notion of resurrection. So they pull out a page from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They are, you know what they are? Let's do a little Bible study today. Let's say it together if we can. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Very good. In the 25th chapter of Deuteronomy, we have this section where Moses teaches about levirate marriage, the duty of a husband's brother. It comes from the Latin levir, which means brother-in-law. And so the basic idea is if a man marries a woman and he dies childless, the brother then steps in, marries the widow, and raises up a child to the deceased brother. The idea basically was that when someone dies, there wasn't an understanding of heaven and hell in the Old Testament as we have in the New Testament. When people died, they went to this shadowy existence called Sheol. And so if you went to this shadowy existence called Sheol without any living air, it was really a drab, drear place. But if you had a living air to keep your name alive among the living, it was somehow better for you. And so this strong idea that as a way of perpetuating the memory of the deceased, you have this levirate marriage idea that Moses teaches about. And so the Sadducees, who have no belief in the resurrection of the dead, they create this absurd scenario. Okay, teacher, you're so smart. Tell us this one. If a wife marries 7 brothers with no children, when the resurrection comes, what happens then? In other words, the underlying question is, who does she belong to? Because they all were married to her. You know, even though that is a weapon kind of question, even though it's an exaggerated, hypocritical question, they weren't looking to learn anything new. They were just looking to do some damage to not only that belief, but to Jesus. Even with all of that, we're still kind of glad they asked it. Because we kind of want to hear Jesus talk about what it's like after this life, too. We're curious. We want to know what heaven is like. We want to know if Grandma and Grandpa are together. We like the idea of thinking of them on a swing on a porch somewhere. We want a glimpse. We want to pull the curtain back, if just for a second, something to stir our hope. We don't want to be like the Sadducees and believe that this is all there is. We don't want to believe that way. We're like Apostle Paul's idea in 1 Corinthians 15:19. Here's what Paul says. If for this life only we have hoped in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. If this is all there is, we're a sad group of people. That's what the apostle says. My dad died 2 years ago, this past October 4. He'd been really in good health most of his life. His last few years of his life, he had some age-related illnesses. He was 88 when he died, and he had been sort of in and out of the hospital. He'd go in the hospital for a little bit, really dealt with congestive heart failure a lot, and then he would, being off his feet for a few days, would have to go and have some therapy to build up his strength. And so it was kind of a rhythm that we had together the last few months of his life. And we had one of those episodes, and Dad was so tired. He was tired, and the therapy was hard, and he was on thickened liquids and all that kind of stuff. It was tough for my dad. And I was getting ready to leave the rest home one day, and I was heading back home to Salisbury. He was in Asheboro, about an hour away. And so I was getting ready to leave, had some ESPN on or something, and Dad just kind of sat up in bed, kind of leaned up in bed, and he said, "You know, I'm not leaving here, right?" So I cut off the TV and I went and sat on his bed, and he said, I've had enough. I'm just ready to die. So I leaned over and I picked up my dad against my chest, and I held him and I wept like a baby for, 5 minutes. And then we both dried our tears and we started talking. Started talking about death. We began to make plans. I listened for my dad's instruction, where things were, how he wanted things handled. We began to talk about what it would be like, he gave me some good guidance in settling his estate. And a couple of days later, I had somebody from the bank come in to put my name on his checking account so that when he died, it would be a little less red tape. It'd be easier for me, for my sister, to navigate. During that time, we talked about a lot of things. We were really blessed. I was so very fortunate. I've walked with a lot of families in my 25 plus years now of being a United Methodist pastor, and I've seen a lot of different experiences of that sacred journey, and so I know we were fortunate. I know what we experienced wasn't what everybody has an opportunity to experience, but we talked about things I wanted to talk about. I told Dad how grateful I was for my childhood and for being raised in a caring family. I was able just to say that. I was able to apologize to him for that time in the 7th grade when he took me to basketball tryouts and he wanted to come in and watch me try out, and I said, "No, Dad, stay in the car." I was a little too cool to have my dad in the stands. It's funny what haunts you over the years. So I told him I was sorry. He didn't even remember it, but boy, it had weighed on my heart for years. And I thanked him for all the times that he had been in the stands when I'd played basketball all those years, traveling to away games. I was glad to be able to say that. Over the next few days, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about heaven. You know, my dad was proud that I was a United Methodist pastor. He was proud that I was a radio announcer. He was just proud of me. If you got children, I just would remind you, your kids never get too old to know your parents are proud. And so but we never talked a lot about religion, interestingly enough. And Mom and Dad never really saw me preach much. But we talked a lot about faith in those days. We talked about heaven. My dad started having these dreams. And his interpretation, they were dreams of heaven. And I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I just listened as he tried to find words to describe the beauty of what he saw in those dreams. And he never could quite find the words, but I saw in his expression the peace those dreams gave him. And we prayed together a prayer of thanksgiving for the peace that passeth understanding. And my dad said something to me I would call profound in that season. He said, "When you know you're dying and you know death is near, there is no fear. I am not afraid," he said to me. So together we walked that sacred journey. And we prayed and we cried and we laughed. When he finally made it to the hospice house, which is where he wanted to go, he just wanted to rest. And so it worked out for Dad to spend his last couple of days in the hospice house. And so I took and I decorated his room with pictures of his life, and I hung up his number 18 Seagrove High School basketball jersey. And when the nurses would come in, I would say, you know, he doesn't look like it now, but there was a time when he was the fastest guy on the basketball court. And he was the leading scorer of Seagrove High School and all county in 1942 and 1943. And I would tell them stories of my dad. I got a letter this week. It was addressed to my dad. But it came to me, and it had been forwarded to me. It was the old post office box that I had closed probably 6 months after Dad's death. It was from a textile firm, and so my dad had a career in textiles, and so I called them. I was actually at Mission Hospital in Asheville. I had been to see John and Sarah, and I called the number just to tell them that my dad was deceased and they could take his name off the mailing list. And the lady on the other end started flipping around papers, and she said, "Well, there's a death benefit, $1,000. And we'll send you some material and you mail it back in." So my sister and I will split the $1,000. But when I hung up, I just laughed and I smiled. And I thanked God that Dad was still blessing me 2 years after his death. You know, our dead live on like that. Maybe it's not an unexpected check. Maybe it's a memory, something that was said, a bit of wisdom passed on that just helps us somehow find our way. So, our dead do live on in us. But that's not the only way that our dead live. Surely, that's not the only way. So we have questions too, just like the Sadducees. Sometimes we have different understandings about heaven. We have different imaginations. Some we take from the Bible, some we take from movies. We have different imaginations of heaven, and we may not agree on what heaven will be like. We may have disagreements. I remember when we were at Tabernacle before I went in the ministry, and we got in this argument in the church. It was a church argument over heaven, of all things. We were arguing about heaven, and some of us younger folks who were much cooler than the older folks, we were clear on our understanding. Some of the older folks had this kooky notion that somehow in heaven there would be levels, there would be degrees based on kind of how you had faithfully lived, different crowns and different levels. And we younger folks thought that was just terrible. There's enough levels here in this life. We don't need levels in heaven. Surely there's no levels or degrees in heaven. And we argued back and forth. And so it was a good opportunity for me to talk to my Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob and Aunt Jean came to Seagrove, and so I told him of our great church controversy and our great argument, and I shared with him the wrong-headed thinking of the older folks and how we younger folks were convinced that we had the heart and mind of God. And so I asked Uncle Bob, tell me, what is your opinion? What do you think? Will there be degrees in heaven or not? And Uncle Bob looked at me and did not bat an eye and said simply, what difference does it make? Uncle Bob wasn't always a lot of fun. Jesus didn't really please the Sadducees either, and he didn't give us a blueprint that we might would have liked. But he said basically, in effect, you're thinking with earthly mind, you don't have a clue. It's different in the new age than it is in this age. People won't be getting married and having babies. It's just different. Your thinking is all wrong. You can't with temporal eyes see eternal glory. You just cannot. And then Jesus turns the table on them. He goes back to the books of Moses. He goes back to the Torah that the Sadducees loved so much. And he said even Moses knew about the resurrection of the dead, because when he speaks of God in the burning bush, he says God is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. It's almost, as I hear Jesus say these words, it's almost as if Jesus is hinting to the fact that God could very well have said to Moses from the burning bush, and they're right here with me. Do you want to speak with them? Because God, Jesus said, is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living, for to him all of them are alive. So we come today in this sacred place, and we stand on a carpet that becomes holy ground through the grace of God. And we gather as the church militant and the church triumphant, and we partake of this holy meal, this rehearsal for the heavenly banquet yet to come, gathering with the Christ who is present at his table and who brings with him all the saints who have died in him. But before we gather at the table, we'll speak some names. We'll ring a bell. And we'll light some candles. And we'll remember and give thanks. And with gratitude and faith and hope, we will entrust our dead to the God of the living. For to him, all of them are alive. Thanks be to God. Amen. I'll invite Les to come forward, and Tommy Jackson, who is our pastoral psychotherapist. Les will be ringing the bells as I read the name, and Tommy will light a candle. And as each name is read, I simply would invite any family members or friends who would like to stand for a few moments to feel free to do that. And we won't rush through this part of the service. Okay. Can you tell me? What is the name?
It's Jennifer, of course, her sister, Lynn Pistolas.
Say it again.
Lynn Pistolas, P-I-S-T-O-L-A-S.
Okay. Okay. Can you put that up there? Thank you. Joanna Baumrucker. Kitty Byers. Liz Bunnell. Martha Copeland. Merlin Crow. Catherine Fulton. Joseph Gallo Sr. Donna Hennessy. Gary Houston. Bill Lewis. Connor Pace. Ed Parks. Gail Pitts. Bill Self. Carrie Speed. Chuck Sutton. Janice Wilson. Lynn Pastolas. And I wonder this morning if there are those you hold in your heart who you are remembering just now. And I'd like to invite you, if you would like, to stand in a moment of silent tribute and memory for your loved one that you may be holding in your heart today, whenever they may have passed away. Would you bow with me for a moment of silent prayer? And so, Father, we give you thanks. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.